All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Lightworker Academy. Today we're talking about cycles of power, and I'm really excited that you're here to join us. This particular topic has a lot of a lot of weight in my work. I teach this in the I Am Alchemy course. I teach this in working with my one-on-one clients. I teach this in it ends up coming up in pretty much everything I talk about because it is such a foundational principle of working practical magic and understanding how energy moves. So really what we'll be talking about today has a lot of universal applications. But before we jump into that, for those of you who might be new to this series, or for those of you who are maybe tuning in after the fact, know that this class is part of a year-long series called Lightworker Academy. So I am offering 12 monthly classes on different topics, and the classes are coming from a healership curriculum from a live training that I'm teaching in October. So I want you to put that on your radar right now, October 10 through 13. It's called I Am Lightworker, and applications are now officially open. So I'll be sharing that link with you. I've already emailed a couple of you about it. If you are currently working with me or have worked with me before, as a few of you on this class have, then you've already seen an email invitation about this. And Kathleen, I believe you're already registered. You've already bought your ticket. So I'm really excited that you'll be there. And so for those of you who might be hearing about this for the first time, now is your time to apply and claim your spot. So we've got early bird pricing that I'll be telling you about at the end of our class. And this I Am Lightworker training and all of these trainings are based in Shamanic, Alchemical, and Advanced Energy Healing techniques. So this is over my about 16 years worth of study and practice in this field. I'm pulling from a whole lot of different bodies of knowledge, and yet we're putting it together in a cohesive picture. So all of these classes are independent, and yet they're related. So if you missed a class, or if you want to go back and catch up on your own, then all of the class recordings are in Lightworker portal. I believe most of you are in that community. If you're not, then you can send me a message and I'll send you the link where you can join Lightworker portal. It's a free online community that I created just for you, and it has boatloads of content. I'm not kidding. It's got so many hours and hours of free material and resources for you, and a place where you can connect with other Lightworkers like yourself. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get rolling in our topic today. But before we do, let's go ahead and set, oh, actually, no, I do have one question before we get going. I am wondering, what are you excited about with this particular topic? And do you have any questions that I can tuck in the back of my mind and make sure I answer today? So Stephanie, you said you're looking forward to this topic. Is there anything in particular you're looking forward to? And / everybody, is there anything you want to hear about today? Stephanie says, I watched your video on the portal, just want to understand more examples. Cool. Which video are you referring to? Are you referring to the lunar videos or a different one? The moon cycles. Okay, great. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, Stephanie's referring to, in Lightworker portal, there's a section called Moon Magic, and we are going to be talking a little bit about the lunar cycle today. It is probably one of the most influential and my personal favorite cycle of power to work with. So I'll be giving you a couple of tools and sharing more resources. Since it's not the main focus of our work today, we'll be kind of giving a couple of pieces, but I do have other classes specifically on the lunar cycle. Manka's asking, I'm looking to get some more understanding of those cycles. Thank you for doing this. Awesome, you're welcome. Absolutely, yeah, we'll be tuning into kind of what are they and how do they work, etc. Erin says, I'm on a quest to step further into my power, and part of that process is redefining power. Yes, okay, I'm interested in all paradigms of power. Beautiful. I really love that. So we're going to be talking about specifically universal power today. And so kind of the essence of where does power come from and how do we relate to the movement of energy and the power that that entails. I love that. Kathleen says, for me, just examples how to make the cycles work for me. Awesome. And I know that you and I have talked about that previously. Cool. Well, it sounds like everybody's got a little bit of an intention that they'd like to get out of our class experience today. And for those of you who don't necessarily have a specific, I want to know this thing, then that's great, because you just get to be open and see what lands for you. So with that, let's go ahead and set everything aside. I see people taking notes. That's awesome. You're totally welcome to take whatever notes you like. And since I am recording the class today, you who are here live are going to receive an email later today, maybe tomorrow, with the recording for the class today. And for everybody else, if you're watching this later, then you're probably watching the recording that I post a couple of weeks after the fact in Lightworker portal. So with that being said, go ahead and set everything down. And we're going to take a couple of minutes to simply drop in and arrive. So I invite you to make any postural adjustments that you need to arrive in a place of stillness. You know, kind of do a little roll of the neck, maybe wiggle the fingers, arch the back, shift in your seat, whatever you need to do. And let's roll the shoulders forward, up, back, and down. And as you arrive in a place of stillness, let's take a couple of moments to simply be present. Simply notice, what is the state of my body? What is the state of my energy right now? Notice whatever comes to you, whatever floats to the top of your awareness. Just go ahead and give it a nod and acknowledge it and send it on its way. We're not holding on to anything. And let's turn our attention now to the breath. We're going to take a few breaths to arrive fully in the body, exhaling everything out together. Deep inhale. And exhale with a sigh. Again, deep inhale. And exhale with a sigh. 2 more, just like that. Feeling the breath arrive in the belly. Deep inhale. Sighing out. Letting your lungs empty. And 1 more. Deep inhale to the belly. And exhale with a sigh. And I invite you to continue to flow with your breath. And as you do so, bring your awareness to the cycle of your breath. That bottom point at the beginning of the breath where you've pushed all the air out of your lungs and there's emptiness, there's potential. And that first rush of air as you start to inhale, passing through the midpoint and arriving in a space of fullness at the top of your breath, maybe pausing just a little bit at the top to notice the fullness. And as you release, feeling that contraction, that relaxation, as you float all the way back down to the bottom of the breath. And maybe when you get to the bottom, you're squeezing a little bit, you're pushing out all the air. And then you do it again. And take a couple of breaths to simply track the cycle of your breath. And this awareness, we're going to invite to continue to stay with us throughout the rest of our class today. And go ahead and When you're ready, bring your attention back to present time awareness, coming back with whatever realizations or noticings you observed in your breath practice, and go ahead and make a couple of notes. What did you get out of that? What did you notice out of that? Let's go ahead and you can keep making notes if you like, but I'd love to hear from a couple of you if you want to either type it in the chat box or unmute yourself. What did you notice and get out of that very simple practice? What came up?
I really loved the invitation to start paying attention to a cycle that's so intimate and present in here and now, and really was excited by the idea of my breath as spiralic, as this repetition, this up and down. It was lovely.
Beautiful. Awesome. I'm really glad you enjoyed that. Yeah. Anybody else?
I realized it's a natural cycle. When you exhale, the inhale is bound to happen, otherwise it's unnatural. And the other, when you are inhaling, it has to go out. So
yes,
that was a interesting awareness.
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable, right? It just happened. Yeah. Okay. And overall, throughout our day, how much are we actually paying to our breath? Or how much attention are we actually paying to our breath in general? People are shaking their heads, like not a lot, right? Like barely at all. And yet this is happening unconsciously all day long. What else do we get out of that? Maybe one more share before we continue.
I have a window next to me, so it was easy to move from thinking about the breath to just looking at things outside that are cycling. So there's like a big full river, and I was just thinking of that as kind of going in its own cycle.
Yeah, beautiful. Great. Awesome. I really love that. Yeah. And if you want to chat anything else in, go ahead and use the chat box if there's anything else that anyone wants to share. Awesome. I love what people are noticing. So Erin was talking about feeling the spiraling nature of the breath and tuning into a very intimate cycle. Manka was noticing kind of that inevitability of, well, if you inhale, you're going to exhale. And if you exhale, you're going to inhale. And it's just kind of a natural flow. And Stacy was making connections to other cycles that she's seeing out the window or seeing in the world. And all of this is awesome. I want you to keep all of this in mind while we're continuing to move through this practice. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today, we've already picked up on a couple of important pieces that we're going to carry through the rest of our conversation. But essentially, we're going to start off with, well, what are cycles of power? What does that mean? What are we talking about when we're relating to this topic? And why do they matter for you personally? And if you have a professional healing practice, why do they especially matter for that? And just kind of show of hands, or I guess you can type it in the chat box. I'd love to know, do people have a professional healing or coaching practice? Kind of show of hands, or give me a little thumbs up. Out of curiosity. Manka, I know you do. Yes. Okay, cool. And I know that everybody here also has some form of personal practice too. So know that everything we're talking about is absolutely applicable in all those layers. So why do cycles of power matter, and what do they mean for you? And then we'll look at a couple of tools for working with some of what I consider to be the most influential cycles of power and the points of energy within them. So Stephanie was asking about the lunar cycle, and little clue, that's kind of the one that we're going to be focusing on today. And at the end of our time today, I'll give you an invitation. I mentioned that I am Lightworker training, but there's a couple of things that you need to know. And then since you're here live, I also have a giveaway. I started giving away a free session with me. And so I'll be kind of selecting somebody. I say it's random. It's really not so random. I'm inviting someone who's demonstrating participation and curiosity here, and I'll kind of announce that at the end of our time today. So thanks for being here live, and we're gonna go ahead and jump in. Are you ready? Yes? Yeah? Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. There we go. Okay. All right. What are cycles of power? We already tuned into probably the most intimate, personal one that we all have access to. Right? So your cycle of breath is a cycle of power. And those kind of 4 points that we were looking at within the cycle of breath, the bottom of the breath, that emptiness when you've squeezed all the air out, the inhalation, so the moving upward in the cycle, the top of the breath, that point of fullness when you're feeling as expanded as possible, and then the release. Really, quite simply, this is what we're talking about within cycles of power. And energy moves this way. All energy moves this way. We often think, especially in the Western world, and especially in the modern Western world, we have this idea of time as a linear trajectory, or our lives as a linear trajectory, or energy moving in a linear fashion. And it's useful to have a linear concept of time simply so we can be on time to things like this class. And yet that's not actually how energy works. So Erin threw out the word spiraling. And that's essentially what we're working with, is everything moves in this spiral fashion. And all the energy that we could ever hope to be working with, our relationships move in cyclical patterns, our money moves in cyclical patterns, our communication moves in cyclical patterns, our health moves in cyclical patterns, all of this. And I guess kind of curiosity, show of hands, and I think money is a really easy example. Does anyone, or has anyone ever had the experience, either as a kid or as you were kind of figuring out your financial situation in the world, where it seems like it's feast or famine, right? Or money's coming in cycles, or like you have a lot of clients and then you have no clients, right? Okay. So we have this right? And how about in our relationships, where it seems like, oh, I'm going out with all my friends and I have all this social energy and communication's great. And then all of a sudden, like, no plans, I'm staying home, yeah, nothing, right? Do we have that experience too? Okay, so our energy, our social energy moves in a cyclical pattern. Our health moves in a cyclical pattern. For the most part, like, I like to think we usually stay healthy, but I know as a kid, I got pneumonia every single winter. And I know that especially as a child, as an empathic child, before I had the tools and the awareness that I have now, I was very affected by seasonal cycles of power, right? And we all have this, who feels like in the winter you just want to curl up with hot chocolate in your favorite blanket and like tune into your favorite series. This is totally a thing. And then summer comes around, it's like, it's party time. Okay, get outside. We're all very affected by cycles of power. And I just named some there. Seasonal cycles of power. We have our daily cycles of power, where we're working with, the sun, kind of midnight to, up to noon at the highest point, and then back down to midnight. This is a solar cycle of power there. And my personal favorite, the one that I work with the most, the lunar cycle of power. And that's what Stephanie was asking about in the moon magic or the moon magic section, and the lunar recordings that I post in Lightworker Portal every new and full moon, with a little bit of some information about that particular archetype and how you can work with that point in the lunar cycle. So when we're working with cycles of power, we're working with the law of expansion and contraction. This is one of the universal laws, the unavoidable universal laws that govern all of us, that govern all interactions of energy. And like Manka was mentioning, it's that feeling of, well, if I exhale, then my inhale is just going to happen, right? And the idea of, we spend most of our days not thinking about our breath at all. It just kind of happens, meaning it exists in the unconscious. And I would say breath, there's a reason that breath work is so powerful. And there's a reason that so many healing modalities and so many meditation practices invite you first to start with the breath, because the breath is a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Our breath works without us having to think about it, meaning that it's an unconscious, operated by the autonomic nervous system, meaning it just kind of goes, right? But we can also control our breath, meaning if we choose to deepen the breath, if we pay attention to the breath, we're bringing our consciousness to an unconscious process and bringing it into our awareness. So it's really the perfect place for us to start whenever we're working with cycles of power, because it's automatically flowing just like cycles of power do, but we can play with it and engage with it in a conscious way. So that practice that we did right at the beginning of class is something that I invite you to return to, is just use your breath as an access point to how does energy move? How am I personally engaging in a very intimate way with cycles of expansion and contraction? And how can I have a tangible, embodied experience of what that's like to feel expansion in my body and then feel contraction in my body? One other piece around cycles of power is the idea of compensatory counterbalancing. And that's essentially a long way of saying what goes up must come down and go up again and come down again. And it's also the idea of compensation, right? So let's think, for example, about seasons. And seasons are one of the cycles of power that I mentioned. So we have the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere of the earth that operate on opposite seasonal cycles. So we're approaching the summer solstice here in the northern hemisphere, and in the southern hemisphere, they're approaching their winter solstice. So as we have more light in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere has less light. And then we'll be moving toward the winter solstice. Here in a few days, we're going to be back in contracting, and the southern hemisphere, they're going to start moving back toward the light. Now, when we look at, okay, well, the same amount of sunlight is always hitting the earth, right? It's just due to our relative position on the earth, we're experiencing it as more or less. It doesn't mean, for right now when we have a lot of light, it doesn't mean that there's less sunlight hitting the earth. It just means that in other areas, they're having more period of darkness as we have more period of light. And then as up here in the northern hemisphere, we start having less light, the southern hemisphere will start having more. So this idea of energy moving in a compensatory counterbalancing pattern, where these movements of energy balance each other out and compensate in cycles of expansion and contraction. We can also think of this, I like to use the example of, imagine that you've got your friends that you're really close to, you have your family, you have your kiddos, whoever in your life, and all of a sudden you decide, I'm going to start a new project, or I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to build a house or whatever. And that project takes a lot of your time and energy. So all of a sudden you're devoting a lot of time and energy to this new project, and it necessarily means that you will have less time and energy to spend with your friends and family. It's not that you love them any less. It's not a bad thing. It just means like, okay, there's this counterbalancing where when I expand in one area of my life, I must contract in another area of my life. There's this saying that, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was in a David Sedaris book. Does anybody like David Sedaris? Where it's, yeah, Jennifer says yes. Okay, so you might know what I'm talking about, but and Stephanie says, love him. All right, maybe help me with this example. But he's talking about a friend illustrated these 4 principal areas, like health, career, friends, and family. And the friend said, you can have 2 out of 4, right? Does that sound familiar? Does that ring a bell? And I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do agree with the principle of if we're truly prioritizing one area of our life, it means that we have less energy for other areas. And it's really silly to pretend that we can do it all. I am a fan of like, yes, we can do a lot of things, but let's be let's use cycles of power and use the necessary movement of expansion and contraction in our lives to empower us to make calculated change and empower us to be predictable in how we're creating change. So before we get into all of that, because I think that's super fun and really important of looking at, okay, what are we actually doing with it? Let's go ahead and take a little pause. If there are any questions or comments or ideas thus far, go ahead and unmute yourself if you got something to share. How's this feeling so far? I saw thumbs up. Any questions? That all make sense? Yeah, making sense? Okay. I think I see people typing. Jennifer says, Erin asked a question above. Oh, is this similar to as above, so below? Kind of. So great question. And Jennifer, thank you for pointing that out to me. I didn't see that. So as above, so below is a principle of alchemical philosophy that relates to correspondence. So essentially it's saying it comes from the Emerald Tablet, which says that which is above corresponds to that which is below, and that which is below corresponds to that which is above to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. So it's speaking about the relationship between conscious and unconscious. It's speaking about the relationship between energetic and material, and it's more related to correspondence than expansion contraction. Does that make sense? Yeah, beautiful. Good question. Okay, awesome. Groovy. Let's keep going. Okay, so what does this mean for you? What do cycles of power mean for you, your personal process, your professional practice, your way of being in the world, and your way of navigating your own personal cycles of energy? So one of the biggest things that I teach to my alchemy students, and one of the principles that we spend essentially a whole year practicing, is change can be more predictable. If we understand transformation, we can work with it consciously. If we know how energy behaves, we can work with it more intentionally to achieve more intentional results. So we get to have a more conscious relationship with change. When we come into understanding of how energy moves, we can move with it more easily. What this means is that we align with cycles of power as opposed to not aligning with cycles of power. And if we're not aligning with cycles of power, we might happen to align with one sort of accidentally or intuitively without really knowing what we're doing, and have things feel like they're going really well. And then all of a sudden we shift our energy, and all of a sudden now it feels like I'm swimming against the current instead of swimming with the current. Has anyone ever had that experience of like, oh yeah, I'm grooving, things feel great. Holy shit, this is hard, right? It's because we were moving with a cycle of power, and then nope, all of a sudden, either the cycle changed and we didn't change with it, or we changed our energy and the cycle kept going without us. Okay, so Jennifer says, I had an experience in the Deschutes that really illustrated that for me. Yeah, okay, so literally a lived experience of swimming with the current versus against the current. Yeah, and that's really what it feels like, right? And raise your hand again if you've had that experience of, I know what it feels like to move with cycles of power. I'm moving with energy. It feels amazing, right? It's almost this intangible, it's flow state, really. And it's kind of hard to put a word on, kind of hard to name. Kathleen says, I love this as a metaphor and use it a lot. Yes, right? But we all also know what it feels like to be feeling like, oh my God, I'm swimming so hard and I'm like gaining an inch of ground for every stroke. And all of us, if I ever take a break, then all of a sudden I'm swept all the way back there, right? We know what that feels like too. Okay, so either literally in our river or in our lives. So this is really why aligning with cycles of power is one of my favorite things, because I'm a firm believer in we shouldn't have to work so hard. And there's a difference between what I call, kind of conscious, intentional work and efforting for the sake of efforting, right? And efforting for the sake of efforting has no place in any of our lives. Busy work and just struggle bus, like we don't need the struggle bus. And yet, imagine if we're moving with the current, you're going to want to make sure you don't run into the bank, or you don't hit any logs or rocks or anything. So you're still taking strokes in the water. You're still using empowered action as you're kind of facing downstream and you know, you got your feet out so you can kind of bounce off anything, and you got your life jacket, okay, but you're still moving around within the current. So you are an active participant. It's not that you're not showing up, it's not that you're not doing things, but you're taking empowered action to stay in the greatest path of alignment. And that, I think, is one of the biggest pieces is, you know, sometimes if I bring this up, someone, you know, I think they might be joking, I'm not sure, but asking essentially like, oh, okay, so you're saying if I figure out the cycle of power, I won't have to do anything ever again. I'm like, that's not how it works. And your life would probably be a lot easier. Okay. So this, Erin says, I think of words like flow and alignment or attuning. Yes. Yeah. Those are all very appropriate words. Stacy says, I think menstrual cycle and greater stages of life. Totally. Totally. So the menstrual cycle is, you know, or people call it their, you know, my moon, I got my moon, right? Because it corresponds, and throughout human history, there's boatloads of evidence in art and literature and metaphor and poetry that relates the woman's menstrual cycle to the lunar cycle, because it's our body's experience of moving through this cyclical relationship. And yes, greater stages of life, right? So all of the evidence of cycles that we're going to be talking about as we get into this in a minute here, universally applicable. Like what we're talking about today, you can apply to anything. So one of the biggest pieces that I see most people missing out on, this is kind of one of the pitfalls that most people fall into, is not receiving the benefits of every point in the cycle, right? So, and this is a really easy temptation to fall into. And I mean, I've been in this position before where it's like, I just want to expand all the time. Has anyone ever had the experience of like expansion or bust, right? Doesn't work that way. Sorry to tell you, you know, I hope I'm not dispelling any illusions right now, but it doesn't work that way. And if we follow that what goes up must come down, what expands must contract, and we're resenting contraction, and this is, you know, like, let's be real, this is where most people resist. We don't like contraction. It feels uncomfortable. We don't want to be in contraction. We're missing out on just as important of a part of the cycle. Expansion and contraction are equally important, and you cannot have expansion without contraction. So if we look at, okay, if I allow myself to expand all the way and get as big as I can, and then I allow myself to contract all the way and go within, then I can move into the fullness of my expansion. What do you think happens? And let's use our breath as a metaphor, right? So imagine if I had you breathe, but not exhale all the way, maybe exhale halfway. And then you're inhaling all the way and exhaling halfway. So essentially you're skipping the bottom part of your cycle of breath. You're moving just through the top part of your breath. What would you eventually feel? Erin, you're making a worried face. What would you, yeah, this, like, would that feel healthy and full and appropriate? Stacy says stifled. Erin says exhausted, right? We wouldn't fully purge our lungs. We'd have old air sitting in our lungs. And if we're operating just at the top of the cycle, we're not going into the rest phase. Erin says not having access to all the power, right? Imagine, and how good it feels, right? To exhale everything out and then take that deep breath in. It's almost like we can take a bigger breath when we start from this mega contraction point. Like if you squeeze all the air out of your lungs and then the next breath you take, it's fucking huge, right? This, like, how big can I get, right? Now imagine the opposite. And sometimes this is the case where we get stuck in a contractive cycle, either because we've experienced trauma or because you know, we're moving a lot of releasing and rest energy, or like in the winter, it's really easy to have that stagnation feeling. Imagine if I told you, okay, you don't get to inhale all the way. You inhale halfway and then you exhale, and you inhale halfway and exhale. So now you're in the bottom part of your cycle of breath. How would that feel? Low energy. Erin says low energy. Yeah, absolutely. right? Would you be able to really do much with that amount of breath in your body? No, right? It would feel really kind of sluggish, and we'd feel sort of slow and lethargic, and really kind of, we'd have a cap on our capacity, right? And Jennifer says it's like having asthma or COPD. Yeah, right? But energetically, the equivalent of that makes it difficult to do anything, right? Okay, so if we're moving it, and Stacy says both of those examples are caps on our capacity, right? So it's really easy to look at with breath. And yet now let's apply that same principle to how do we relate to the cycle of energy in our lives. For those of us who are self-employed, are anybody self-employed in here? Right? Or working with creative projects, whether or not it's for your own business. Yeah. Okay. So imagine if we're just operating in the top part of the energy. What does that translate to? Expansion, repeat, and we never go into the full bottom part. This leads to burnout. I'll tell you right now, this is a recipe for depletion. This is a recipe for adrenal fatigue. This is a recipe for feeling uninspired and resentful of your work because you're working all the time. And this is the efforting up here, right? And what about the creative projects, or what about being self-employed and having our energy down here? We're not making any money. We feel really stagnant. We don't have any creative ideas. We don't feel excited about our work. Right? And I would say most of us are in this upper, like, burnout, spinning pattern, right? So when we know about cycles of power, and again, applying this to our creative projects, applying this to our money, applying this to relationships, applying this to our own health, applying this to our vacation time, applying this to how we're calendaring out our year, it means that we get to receive the full benefits of all of those parts of the cycle. And so this is where, we're going to look at some of my little note cards here so we can illustrate some of these points. Okay, so here is our very first basic, starting at, like, essentially, if we, are looking at 0 and 1 as our polarities, 0 being the nadir of the point, NADIR is the bottommost point in the cycle, to the acme, the 1 up here, acme being the topmost point in the cycle. And then moving back down, right? So 0, energy increases up to the top, energy decreases back down to the bottom. Very simple, right? Okay. Now, let's look at that in terms of what is actually happening. So we're keeping this in mind, and now we're looking here. Okay, so keep this in your brain, and now we're looking at this one. So moving from the 0 point, this is our 0 point here. This point in the energy cycle is cultivation. We're building. Cultivation, like increasing energy, we're learning. This is like a learning point. This is a building energy. This is building excitement, having ideas, doing preparation, putting projects together, right? Training for a race, right? Cultivation. And here's our plus point. And then we're going up. So this point at the top right here, we're starting to express the energy. We're putting it out in the world. Right? So it's really easy to think of this as like a creative project. Okay, so cultivation, I have the idea and I'm putting this stuff together. Expression, I'm sharing it out in the world. Erin, I know you do art stuff, right? So you have this like, okay, well, here's all my art. Then, okay, the art show's over. Now I'm in receiving. Now I'm reflecting on people bought my art. That's amazing. I'm counting my money. I had really good feedback from that presentation I did at work. I'm looking at the results that I did from my race, and I'm learning stuff. Okay, so I'm receiving from the expression that I put out. Then this last point is integration. Integration and rest. How am I learning from that experience? How am I implementing what I received so that I can do it again better next time? How am I allowing myself to restore my system, restore my body, restore my energy field, restore my money, all of these pieces, restore my creativity, so that when I'm asked, the next time I go into cultivation, I'm ready, right? This is the same card, right? So is that big enough? Can you see that okay? Yeah? Okay, great. So, because what happens, and let's kind of look at this, well, what happens if imagine if we're in kind of like this part of the cycle, expression and receiving, expression and receiving, expression, or even cultivation and expression, and cultivation and expression. What happens? Erin says, thinking of receiving as part of the waning process is revelatory for me. Oh, we're going to go there next. Okay. Stephanie says, no, there's no feedback. Exactly. There's no feedback. There's no context. There's no learning, right? The integration, I want you to write this down. Integration, yeah, and Manka says no rest. Integration equals rest and kind of input, right? And digestion. So it's where we put all of the new information, and we put, we're becoming different people throughout this cycle, right? Like you're a different person by the time you get to the end of the cycle than you were when you started. So if you're not integrating, and imagine, then you try to go, you're going straight from receiving to cultivation. You're cultivating either without sufficient energy to cultivate a practice, or you're cultivating without actually implementing any of the new stuff. Right? And again, for those of us who either do creative projects or are self-employed, right? If we're cultivating without actually integrating, then we're just producing the same shit over and over and over without changing, right? And Erin says, integration is also where dreaming happens. Say more about that. Manka says no up level, for sure. If we're looking at this as a spiral process, right, we need to integrate in order to up level. If we're looking at this from the energetic perspective, if we're not receiving and integrating, then we're going to burn ourselves out real fast. Cultivation and expression, and a lot of healers get stuck in that, for sure. Great. Erin, I see you writing more about that. You can also unmute yourself if you would like. Before we can cultivate and being the waxing period, we need space for imagining. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that takes place right here. So let's just jump to our next card. So this, the lunar cycle. So this point at the bottom of the cycle is the new moon, the dark moon. And that's where we have that, where we plant the seed. So if we're in the integration, yes, the dreaming and imagining that happens in the integration phase gives us the idea for the seed to plant in the new moon. And so if you're interested in more specifically on the lunar cycle, as Stephanie mentioned, I do have working with the lunar cycle as a taste of I Am Alchemy class that's in the Lightworker portal. So you can go access that class. And we're just going to very briefly touch upon it today, since I have a whole hour. I think it's an hour. It might even be 90 minutes. I think it's an hour devoted specifically to the lunar cycle. So invitation to go finish up or circle back there. So here, these points, remember our 0 and plus and 1 little chart here corresponds to these points in the lunar cycle of power. So the new moon, we're cultivating energy. To the first quarter, we're cultivating, then we're expressing energy. We get to the full moon, the highest point in expression, the brightest light, and then we're receiving. This is part of the cycle of creation. So receiving is part of the waning cycle. And then integration. We get to the third quarter. Okay, now we're integrating. What did we learn? What did we get out of that? Okay, now we're going to do it again. So does anybody have a manifestation practice? Yeah? The lunar cycle is your best friend for the manifestation practice. Best friend. Let's take one more little look at another cycle of power. This is the seasonal cycle of power. So we're a couple of days away from here, the summer solstice, in terms of the solar seasonal cycle of power here in the Northern Hemisphere. We're right at the biggest container of expression. And ironically, we're heading into summer, right? So like this is when a lot of people are putting out a lot of energy. This is when a lot of people are partying or camping or doing a lot of things. And yet this is the receiving time, right? So invitation, as we're heading into summer, how can I be in receiving? How can I fill myself up? How can I really love all these experiences and enjoy myself fully? How can I let this be part of my drinking in energy so that then when we get to the autumn equinox and we're heading into winter, we can be integrating, right? Dreaming, thinking about projects for the next cycle of expansion after we head through the winter solstice. The light's coming back. Okay, we're moving into cultivation. We're having ideas. We're putting projects into place. We're expressing them. We're getting bigger throughout the spring. And then we're receiving. Jennifer says, is more about the lunar cycle is your best friend for manifestation process available in the talk you were talking about in the Lightworker portal? Kind of. I think that one is, that takes place more within the alchemical training specifically, since it is a kind of an in-depth process that doesn't necessarily make it into the online training, since those are more kind of giving people tools to start working with it. But I would say start with the recording and then circle back with me if you have other questions, and we can always talk about it. Sound good? Cool, great. How's this feeling so far? Any questions or thoughts? Anyone have any epiphanies? Erin says, so lovely. You're welcome. Okay. No questions. Wow. Okay. People must be taking lots of notes. Manka says, eye-opening. Yeah. Great. What is your favorite thing that you've learned thus far? Stephanie says, how do you leverage the cycles? In other words, what if you want something different? That's a great question. So, and knowing that this is only an hour, a little bit of a taster of this larger training, that's kind of a continuation of the training in a separate experience. But I will say leveraging the cycles, you know, first of all, knowledge is power. Now that you know this, you have some tools that you can start playing with. Leveraging the cycles involves knowing what cycles are at play in your life, meaning what is your body corresponding to, what influences are you having seasonally, what influences are you having in all these different areas, and then how do you actually allow yourself to engage with them in the appropriate way, meaning don't start a boatload of new projects in the middle of winter, right? Like let that be seasonally appropriate, meaning nourish your health when you're in these different points in the lunar cycle. Start tracking. And I do have one piece that I would invite you to do to start, since again, learning how to leverage the cycles of power is a very long-term process that involves, and Kathleen and I have talked about this, involves tracking cycles. So my first recommendation to you to start is look up the cycles of the moon and write them in your calendar and just start paying attention. Start noticing, okay, so new moon, we just had a full moon like 2 days ago, right? So maybe make some notes in your calendar of like, this is how I'm feeling with absolutely no agenda. And then when we get to the third quarter here in about a week, okay, well, this is how I'm feeling and this is what's going on. And then you get to the new moon and you're just continuing to track, and then spend a couple of months doing that and look back and see, what am I noticing? Right? And this is, I mean, there's no shortcut to that. And learning how to work with the cycles of power requires having a relationship with how they're showing up in your life and how they're affecting you. And Stephanie, if you want to kind of know more about that, then we can talk about that and talk about what might be an effective way for you to do that. So let's talk. Okay, so an exercise, a real quick exercise. You have about a minute. So don't even write the prompt down, okay? But we're going to just make a couple of bullet points. So your first question, what points in the cycle of power do I most naturally relate to? So if we're looking at the cultivation, expression, receiving, integration, which of those do you most naturally relate to? You can write it down. Jennifer says integration, great. Your second question to write for yourself, which do I not relate to? Which don't I have a strong relationship to? And as you look at that, maybe jot down 1 or 2 notes of how can I cultivate a relationship with these parts? So if I'm, for example, we had Stacy say integration as well. And if you're saying, okay, well, maybe I don't have a very strong cultivation practice, or I don't cultivate a lot of energy, maybe just jot down 1 or 2 bullet points for how you can practice cultivating energy. And if you're like, I have no idea, then that's okay too. And you can message me and we'll talk about it. Okay, so I'm kind of curious, a couple of you chatted in. Anyone else want to chat in which ones or which points in the cycle of power is like your comfort zone? Or unmute yourself, that's good too. Erin says receiving is least comfortable. Good noticing. I would say that's the case in general for a lot of people. Manka says expression for me is the one I don't relate to lately. Ah, gotcha. Okay, so you're operating like in this part of the cycle, like not getting so much into the top part. Okay, but in general, receiving. So, okay, so we've got a couple of votes for less comfortable with receiving. Stephanie says integration is my comfort zone. I struggle with cultivation. Cool, right? So all of this, we all have our natural tendencies, right? I would say I do really well in like the integration, cultivation, and I've learned to do pretty well in the expression, but receiving is still my zone that I'm practicing, right? And so and Kathleen says I'm more comfortable with the contraction side. Yeah, so that would be the integration and cultivation. Or contraction side. No, that would be receiving and integration side. Great. Okay. Beautiful. So this gives us some information. Again, this is only an hour training. This is kind of the first dipping your toe in the water of that energy current, and know that there's a lot more that we can do with this. So in spirit of honoring our time today, I'm going to leave it there. And I invite you all know how to get a hold of me. I invite you to send me an email. We can set up a time to talk and a conversation. My invitation for you is if you want more of this, if you want training, then now's the time to grab your early bird ticket for I Am Lightworker training. So early bird tickets are on sale. They're going to be up through August 1st, but I already have a handful of spots grabbed. It's capped at 20 people. So if you want to ensure your early bird ticket and you want to make sure that you get a spot, I would go ahead and submit your application as soon as possible. Kathleen says, so excited for October. Awesome. I'm so excited to see you there. I think it'll be so fun. And it's at Heaven and Earth Retreats in Banks, Oregon. Jennifer, I know you're really not far from there, so it's pretty darn close to you. And the early bird price is $997 or 3 payments of $367. So there is a way that you can break it up and have 3 monthly payments. And this training is really designed, it's healership training, it's 4 days, it's all day for 4 days, lunch is included at this amazingly beautiful retreat property owned by a friend of mine. So this training is really designed to help you become the healer that you were born to be, whether that means for yourself, whether it means for other people out in the world, whether it means through a professional practice or simply being your bright, shiny lightworker self and having these tools and awarenesses to empower you to live your best life and empower those that you care about to live their best lives. So the process for that is it's by application. So you do need to submit an application unless Kathleen is currently working with me, so we know each other, so she didn't have to, but the rest of you, since we don't have, and Manka, if you want to come, you're good, but you do need to submit an application, the rest of you, and then we'll set up an interview to make sure it's a good fit, and I would love to see you there. So if you want to do that, I'm going to go ahead and copy the link in right now, so you can just click on that right away. There you go. And you can get the process rolling. So you do have a minute before applications close, but I do encourage you to jump in and grab your spot as soon as possible because I am registering people, and once it's full, it's full. It's the capacity of the space. I can't add more. Okay, Jennifer is saying, will I Am Lightworker include markedly more depth and advanced concepts and processes? Yes. Yeah, so the Lightworker Academy is little snippets of all these different pieces of training, and imagine doing it for all days with 20 other Lightworkers in the woods. Like, yeah, it's going to be a lot more in depth. So, so this is kind of our little dipping the toes in the water version of that. So for our giveaway, there was a lot of really amazing participation. Thank you so much for everybody tuning in. And Stephanie, you asked some great questions, and I've seen you on a lot of these classes before, so I would love to gift you a session with me. And for the rest of you, you are always invited to reach out and book a time to talk to me. So it doesn't mean that we can't ever talk. Stephanie says, yay, cool. Okay, great. So I'm going to send you a follow-up email. I have your email address, and I'll give you a link to put yourself on my calendar. That's at least a $250 value, in case everybody was wondering how to engage with me. The best way is to send me an email, to keep asking questions. The next class is next month on July 16th, same time, and we'll be talking about empowered empathy. So you can go ahead and grab your spot. I'll send you an invitation when I send out the email for this follow-up, and I'll see you at the next class. I hope you submit an application for I Am Lightworker. There's Q&A, there's the Lunar Alchemy Circles. There's a lot of ways to keep learning. So I hope that you had a great class experience. I'm really excited to be able to do this with you. Go ahead and give yourselves a hug. Great work today. Great job. A whole lot of learning and a whole lot of new epiphanies. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just love yourself up for taking the space and time for this today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, everybody. Monica says, thank you so much. I'm so glad you were here. It was nice to see you. It's been a minute. So thanks for joining, everyone. And I do hope to see you next month. Reach out with any questions, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.